Welcome to Scare Confident. I'm your host, Tiffany Souter. Today has been a sweet day in our house. It is Quincy's 4th birthday, and I'm recording a bunch of content, not a bunch, but I'm recording some ahead of time here because Samantha's getting ready to have her baby, which is amazing. And so we're trying to get ahead so that I don't screw things up while she's on maternity leave. So I think this is like maybe dropping in the fall. But anyways, it's like the sweetest thing. Quincy's little birthday. She's 4. And I think forever, this little girl is just going to remind me that it's just so good that there's some things we don't get to pick in life and that ultimately God is in control. And I just cannot imagine our family without her. It's just wild. And she just brings this like sweet, exuberant innocence into our household. And I crack up that JR and I, here we are in our early 40s and we still have such a little kid that hasn't even started school. And it's just pretty sweet. So anyway, she's just like my little reminder that our plans and what we think we want is oftentimes not what we need. And that little girl is like sometimes just the face of God to me. So anyways, okay, we're not going to talk about Quincy this whole episode, but I don't know, I just want to share that. So I don't know what kind of messy thing there is in your life that sometimes just needs to remind you that sometimes being in control is not the best thing, actually, says this high achieving planner who likes things to be very much on a schedule. So anyways, what I wanted to actually talk about is how being a CEO really helped me become a better, I don't know if the word CEO or COO of my household. And I guess it's probably CEO because while I don't alone set the vision and strategy for our family, I would say that I codify it for our family. JR is more like naturally focused towards goals, and I really need the exercise of articulating them, writing them down, verbally managing towards them, and like making sure that I don't get distracted. Those have to be very proactive motions for me. And JR can more just like, yeah, I decided that 2 years ago and that's still what I'm doing. And I'm like, I love that for you, but I can get really distracted with things that look fun, feel fun, whatever, I just can. And so driving towards my goals is something that has to be a very proactive motion for me, and like weeding out distractions and being really thoughtful about what I'm going to say no to. Those are things I have to have like 2 hands on the wheel around. I'm like doing that right now with my hands. I have to like hold tight on the steering wheel or it will just sort of veer off the road. And I feel like JR can drive with one knee and he doesn't forget that like this is the road that I want to be on. So anyway, just differences in how we're wired. I wanted to talk about different ways that being a CEO at Element 3 or president at Element 3 has helped me, I think, lead our family or be just like put things in place in our family that have just like really helped us continue to get better at operating as a team. If you had asked JR and I individually, what is the word that we most want our family to feel like? We would both use the word team when we went to marriage counseling and they had like pages and pages and pages of words to pick from. We both picked teamwork. Like that is a key part of the way that we want our lives to feel like, and not just our marriage, but also I want our family to feel like, hey, we're all equal participants in our family and we have different roles that we play, certainly, but we are not only going to like run after our own goals individually, but we are going to help and be agents for one another so that we can all get done what needs to happen. So I want to talk through some of those things that came forward. I've been pretty open about for the first, 15 years, maybe less than that, about 10, 12 years of my marriage, of being a parent, of being a working mom, of being a leader. I like used brute force and working really, really hard, being super diligent and responsible. That was like my primary list of ingredients for the way I was approaching life. I was showing up, my hair was washed, and I was working really hard, but I was not being very strategic. I wasn't being very honest with myself about what my priorities were. I wasn't honest with myself about the finite capacity of my time. I just wasn't very good at that. And so I just kept pushing harder and harder and harder and harder. And I know this is not a unique story to me. A lot of people get to the place where like, holy crap, I was like, this is like really not sustainable. I cannot do this anymore. And that was what happened to us. And like 2017, 2018, like everything just crashed. Our marriage got hard. My business got way harder. I just kind of lost myself in that season. And so as I started to rebuild, I started to say like, well, how do I do this differently? Because I can either say no to like everything but one thing and at least do that well and have capacity. But I was like so terrified I was going to be bored. I was terrified I was going to be resentful, that in my head, it would have been like, I had to walk away from my career so that I could be a better mom. I had to walk away from my career so that we could have more capacity to invest in our marriage. I was like, I didn't want to have to say no to something. I wanted all these things in my life, but the way that we were doing it was like wrecking everything. And I had to at least acknowledge that was true. That was a fact. And so as I was starting to rebuild our business in a way that was more sustainable, that it was systematically set up so that it could grow and it could support new people coming into the organization and they could be successful. It could support people having careers there and not just jobs for a short period of time. We could build a brand that had material impact in the space and community that we were playing in, that we could have financial results that rewarded our people for the hard work that they were putting in and create stability for them. And that's like not a forever promise, but like that they could trust that we were going to be there for them and we were going to operate. And as we started to rebuild the business to be able to help support all of those things that were like, these are imperatives of a business if you want it to be around for a really, really long time, which I wanted it to be around. I want it to be around for a really, really long time. I didn't want to just have this flash in the pan that either like paid me a bunch of money for a short period of time or we sold it right before we wrecked it or whatever it was. Like if you want to do that, then you have to put some things in place. And so I wrote down a few different areas. I think I have 4 here of how learning how to lead a team to success. And I would say in a way that feels successful, meaning it's like aligned with our values and people are growing. I want those same things for my family. And they're not actually that different in the sense of they're both people-based entities, a family and an organization. They're both complex because we're all different people trying to work towards our own and collective achievement. And they're just not that different from one another. There's very routine things that need to happen. There's very exciting things that need to happen. And sometimes I think one of the biggest difficulties in running a family instead of a business is that there's not a monthly profit and loss statement in our personal lives that gets our attention in 30-day increments and like to figure out what's working and what's not and where's their variance and where do we need to make some adjustments. We do that with so much more urgency and discipline, and these cycles of like planning and implementation come so much more readily in our business lives and our professional lives than they do in our family lives. And a lot of what I've put together in the Life of And Academy is like literally like, what is the operating infrastructure of our household so that the most simple things, we can own the ordinary, as I say, we can own the most ordinary tasks so that they happen like automatically. And so that we have the capacity for things like travel sports and our own health and family vacations and I don't know, going on a hiking trip as a family, like stuff that you want to do. How do you make the most ordinary parts fit into the smallest possible container? So a lot of what I put together in the Life of And Academy for sure has taken cues and things that I've learned from building Element 3 to be a really successful business. And I'm going to share some of those parallels here. Okay. And it's taking me a 10-minute preamble to get to it, but that's just how it goes sometimes, people. Okay. The first is that defining and teaching from values. You don't have to read very far into leadership literature to see that like a company having really defined values is a really important part of its ability to be, for people to be able to behave in a way that is aligned. And so I would say if you went and ask each person in our family, like what our family values are, we'd probably have slightly different vocabulary for it. However, if you went and asked people in the agency what our company values are, they would have exactly the same vocabulary for it. So I manage them. I would say it's a little bit more intuitive at home, But in the same way that when I'm giving feedback at work to people and helping them understand like where maybe there's been some behavior that I'm not super excited about, I will talk about that in the lens of our values. I'll give feedback and say, hey, when we were preparing for this client meeting, there were 4 or 5 things that we could have done to help the client be more prepared coming into that meeting. When we talk about our value of delight with excellence, part of what we mean is putting ourselves in our client's shoes so that the experience, the preparedness, the follow-up feels almost seamless. That's what we mean when we say delight with excellence. So that would be a way in my work world where I would give feedback to somebody through the lens of our values and help them be more clear. It is the exact same way when we think about our parenting with our kids. How do we give them feedback through the lens of our values, our expectations of them, the way that we want them to behave? Because at some point they're going to leave our house, or like my oldest is getting close to being 16. I need to let her begin practicing making decisions on her own. It's not just my job to like fill in the blank every single time there's a Y in the road for her. She has to be able to make some of those decisions. And so if I can teach her lessons through the lens of our family values, one of the stories that comes to my mind is that I remember with one of my daughters, I'll protect the innocent here. I had asked her a question and she told me the answer. And while the answer was inherently not a lie, it was not the complete truth. And I knew that because I already knew the answer to the question. And so as I talked to her about that situation, I told her, hey, you're going to have all kinds of situations in life where you get to choose if you want to tell some of the truth, which is not technically a lie, or if you are going to have the courage and your character is going to be someone who tells all of the truth. And I asked her to kind of extrapolate forward, like, let's imagine, what does telling the whole truth do for your relationship with the person on the other side? Does it make them trust you more? Does it make you trust them less? Does it make you want to be more of a teammate with that person or less of a teammate? Like I asked her to roll forward. Let's think about what happens when you decide to have the courage to step in and tell the whole truth. And then I was able to say, like, as a family, this is what we believe the Bible says our requirements are of our behavior. And this is how we are going to choose to live. We are going to be people who tell the whole truth, whether we're asked for it or not, because that is about our character as an individual. And that is a really important thing for you to steward. And so again, this isn't like me and my amazing parenting. I do feel like in this moment, I was given a lot of wisdom and clarity instead of like ripping her face off, which is partially what I wanted to do. Let's be clear. I had to take a beat and think about, how do I do this well? But when we define our values as a family, and I think we would be served actually as a family in being even more explicit about these being defined, and we teach and parent from those values, we are handing them over to our kids. We are teaching them how to think critically about them. And again, it's exactly what we're doing inside of the cultures that we're building in our companies that we're leading, and the teams that we're leading, and the things that we're trying to get done in our professional world. We know the more aligned a team is around our values, the more they're going to make decisions that are maybe not exactly the same, but they are in the spirit of where we're moving as a team. And so I think this principle of defining and teaching from our values is one of those things that I picked up from my professional life, where it just feels like so obvious. We talk about it as it relates to like building culture and being able to keep your people and having a place that people want to work. Well, our kids don't get the choice to leave us, you know, but how do we show up and think about our family culture in that same way? Okay. The second one is clear expectations. So, and this is probably a little bit of a first cousin to values, but I think about this as it relates to our family practice of understanding priorities. And maybe this is actually, let me switch the order of these because I think it's going to make more sense. So the first one is define and teach from your values. The second one is that if you think about in our professional lives, again, people are most motivating and most clear and most direct with their behavior when they have clearly articulated and explicit goals and priorities that they are running after. And when those are clearly defined, they're agreed upon with the leadership and their manager and the business, they're seen as a priority for what's required to move things forward. They then can plan their time according to those things, and everybody can support managing towards those clearly articulated goals and priorities. So, how do we take that same concept and apply it to our families? Well, about quarterly, I always do it in seasons of coming change. So in our family, it really tracks the school calendar. So when we were coming into summer, I asked all of the girls, what are your priorities for the summer? And some years I have them write them all down and post them on the refrigerator so that we can all see what we're trying to drive our time towards. So when they come to me and say, I'm bored, I can say, hey, let's go look at your goals list for the summer and see what you can work towards. It also allows me to be able to see what it is that their priorities are so that I know how to manage their time, our calendar as a family, and we can prioritize accordingly. So the summer before last, Aubrey had some camps that overlapped with when my sister and her kids are here. And so she did not get as much time with cousins as a result of that. And so coming into this summer, she's like, I want to be able to do my camps, but I don't want it to sacrifice my time with my cousins. And I was like, that's cool. That just means you're going to basically be gone for most of the month of June. Are you okay with that? Because that just means you're going to be back to back. And I don't want to hear I'm tired and I can't help out when you are home if we're going to do that. And she was like, got it, Mom. That's the compromise, is if you're going to do these back-to-back camps, when you are home, you cannot fall apart and be a disaster, because otherwise we'll just need to spread these camps out because I'm not going to manage that fallout of that priority change. She's like, totally get it. That makes sense to me. So was it like we didn't execute 100% on the no falling apart, but I feel like it went much better and we were aligned going into it. And I could help make the decisions around when are the dates that she's going to be signed up for, because I knew that was a priority that she wanted me to help manage. So I am such a major advocate of this, of not just listening to what are your kids' priorities. And I think honestly, probably 6 years old is when they understand this concept. But when they're even 5, you can kind of say hey, do you want to have a friend over 3 different times this summer? Do you want to go to the pool and eat chicken nuggets for dinner? It doesn't have to be super serious stuff, but it helps them be oh, you're asking me what I want, and we're going to go do that as a family, or maybe just, you and the kid and one parent or an older sibling, and we're going to check those things off. And it begins to create this understanding of this relationship between I set intention, I executed my energy towards that, and then it happened. And I think that cycle is such an important thing to learn no matter what season of life we're in. So as we're getting ready to go into another change season of going into school year, and then we'll do it again for the second semester, what are our priorities? Are you in season or out of season in your sports? What classes are you taking? And are any of them AP and super hard? Aubrey's getting her driver's license, so we have to get a certain number of driving hours in. How are we going to make sure that that happens? How can JR support when he's home? Can they go out driving after dinner? Literally, we have to actively manage the priorities in our household as a family. And we have to operate as a team. And I also want the girls to understand what my priorities are in my work. What am I working on in my personal life, in my health? What is happening? What are my objectives? And how can they support me? And the same thing for JR. Is he going to be in a season of a bunch of travel? Is he going to be home? What's that going to look like? It sets everybody's expectations and allows us to operate as a team, which goes back to what I talked about earlier. So what are their goals? What are their priorities? And how do you publish them and actively manage towards them? And again, for us, it's always going into seasons of change, usually kind of 3 times a year, going into summer, going into first semester, and then second semester, the early part of winter and spring. So we talk about Aubrey's going to be turning 16. What do you want to be doing for your birthday party? Literally, I look ahead and see everything that's coming, and we will talk through it. I say everything I can see, so that the stuff that I know is happening, I can proactively be ready for. And that way there's some capacity for the surprises and kind of like last minute things in. So yeah, okay. I want to talk about clear expectations. And I'll just, I guess, maybe quickly teach a principle. But when you think about like a new employee or an employee that's in a role that you work for, the more clear you can be with them about what your expectations are, the better chance they're going to have at being successful. And so I love this paradigm. I don't even know what the word is, like principle. Maybe that's a better word. I love this principle of implied expectations versus explicit agreements. And implied expectations is just that. It's like this thing that is like inherently implied. It has never actually been stated to what end, at what frequency, like how is it going to happen, etc. Implied expectations versus explicit agreements. Let me give you an example in our household of something that is an implied expectation, but for me growing up was an explicit agreement. I love a clean car. I get that because my dad loves clean cars. And like, even though we had 4 kids growing up, the inside of our vehicles when I was growing up literally were always spotless. And kind of the same on the outside, because every single Saturday, my sister and I had to clean out the inside and outside. Like we had to sweep out dust, wash the windows of our big conversion van. I was usually the inside. And then we had to hand wash the outside of it. And we had to hand wash it inside of the garage because that meant we could do it in every season. And my dad did not like it when the sun dried the water spots on. And so we would hand chamois this thing off in the garage. Isn't this hilarious? Like we totally did this. We lived in a small town. There was not like a big car wash. We just like zoom through the car wash now. My kids have no idea. So I kind of went on a tangent, but that's like why I love a clean car. I think everybody loves a clean car, but I like grew up with a clean car, so I know it's possible. So when I was growing up, it was a very explicit agreement. Every single Saturday, my sister and I had to do that. It did not matter what had happened on Friday night. We had to get the car clean. And if not, there was going to be some consequence, no doubt. Now with my kids, it's very much an implied expectation, meaning I will be like, you guys, it's like a barn in here. Somebody needs to clean it out. Or you 4 of you need to take a half hour and get this thing cleaned up because I can't stand it anymore. I have not taken that from, it's like, hey, episodically, we're going to do this, and said like, hey, every single Saturday, this is going to happen. But the more clear you can make your expectations of your kids, and one thing that I do is this morning or evening routine where we shut down the house. I'm going to call it 320 out of 365 days a year, where we run this evening wind down, wipe down the counters, sweep the floor, take out the trash, run the dishwasher, pack lunches, do the things that shut the household down. And that is an explicit agreement with my family. They know this is what we have to do every single night. So if you're feeling frustrated, like, yeah, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to keep everybody moving towards their goals, but it's not working. It might be because everything you're wanting them to do, or all of the behaviors and routines that it takes to move that stuff forward, is so implied. It's so like ish in the house that nobody can participate in it consistently because it's never been turned into a very explicit agreement with the family of, hey, if we want to get all these things to happen, then that means we have to make sure this stuff happens first, because this is the vehicle that our goals ride in, is if we do this stuff. Like this morning is a great example. I don't know, it was in the car like literally 4.5 hours yesterday, which it's weird that that's the kind of day that makes me really tired, but it's just like, oh my gosh, I've just been driving everywhere. There's no flow to anything. I don't feel like I get anything really done on those days. And I just don't feel like, woo, my energized, goal-oriented self at the end of those days. And so we got home late. I wasn't really prepared for that. So we ordered pizza. We stood around the island and chatted as a family while we did that. And then I just sort of like sat on the couch for an hour and a half, and I ordered some stuff with my girls online, and like I sort of like chatting with people, but just was like kind of unmotivated. And I didn't get my kitchen all cleaned up last night. And this morning I woke up and I walked out there, and my plan was to go take a run, but I didn't. I spent 25 minutes instead cleaning up the night before, like reading an article on the counter. Like I just putzed around. And I know that because I did not run my evening routine and I did not hold tight to the thing that I know runs the next day so much better, that I woke up and just like instantly got distracted. The space cluttered makes my brain cluttered. And I was like, I cannot go take a run before this stuff is like all cleaned up, because I went out to go get my morning caffeine and I was like, oh, it just feels gross in here. And I just like literally threw off my whole morning. And now here I am mid-morning and I'm just sort of like annoyed with myself that I didn't go sweat. And it's this domino effect. And so when you have these explicit agreements in place and you have a way to hold yourself accountable to like, this is the thing we decided to do, it makes everything downstream work better. And look in your work life, it's the exact same thing. When there are processes defined, that is how you move something from an implicit expectation to an explicit agreement. When you move something from, hey, everybody can do this their own way, that's an implied expectation, to an explicit agreement, which is, hey, if you are going to be in this job and you are going to work on this project, then this is exactly the way that it needs to happen. That is an explicit agreement. And so we need to do that in our own households, I believe, for the most ordinary things in our lives, so that we have the space mentally and physically to actually move our time and resources towards our goals and not just existing. So that kind of, I think, leads into my last thing, which is how do we put systems in place where right now there are bespoke activities to get a lot of ordinary things done? Meaning ordering groceries. That can be a very systematic thing, meaning this is exactly how I do it. This is the list of groceries that I order. I ordered on Thursday afternoon for delivery on Thursday evening so that we can prep and chop over the weekend and I food plan on Wednesday. That is a system versus episodically. It's like sometimes we go to the store, sometimes we order online, sometimes we go to the store 4 times a week, sometimes we get everything at Costco on Sunday. That is still getting groceries, but that is a very bespoke solve for every single week. And that takes a lot of solving energy to do that. So when you turn things like that, very ordinary stuff, into a system, it gets very ordinary to feed and manage those things. And when you do it long enough, you don't even notice almost that you're doing it because it becomes so automatic. So it does take some energy to make sure you're clearing the space for that stuff to happen. Or if we're away at a game and it's like when I'm supposed to be getting groceries ordered, I just have to be like, okay, I got to set a reminder that when I sit in the bleachers, that I sit down and spend 10 minutes getting my grocery order in, because this is when it has to happen. So I do have to like very actively manage myself in those ways of like, when am I going to be sitting outside of a school picking a kid up, or if I'm going to be sitting in the bleachers, or how can I make things accessible from almost anywhere I am, so that I can still run those systems no matter what's happening and no matter where I physically am, because that is not always the same place every single week. So, okay, I'm sure that if we were chatting, you would have other places where you see your behaviors, your disciplines, your way of operating in your professional life, that if you did some of those things in your personal life could also serve your family to be able to create capacity, move everybody towards their goals so that we can live this extraordinary life. Like there is a lot of regular stuff that has to happen, like laundry and groceries and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that that was intended to be all of our existence. And if we can put a few simple things in place, I think that we can have more and more capacity for the people and the extraordinary adventure that is this amazing life of And. As always, thanks for listening to this episode. If for some reason this episode has touched you and you think there's somebody in your life that could benefit from it, I would be so appreciative if you would click share on this episode and send it to a friend. Thanks so much, and go crush your day. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Scared Confident. Until next time, keep telling fear, you will not decide what happens in my life. I will.